This person supports the startup community like very few attorneys in our city. He is behind founders all day, every day. He's been a very big proponent of the 2023 bill that's, knock wood, hopefully going to pass very soon. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Joe Wallin from Davis Wright Tremaine. I've got a sheet full of questions that I never get through. So there's never a lack of questions for guests. And I know since Joe's an attorney that there's people here that have some extra special questions that I don't have on my list. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask questions till probably around 8 o'clock or so, and then I'll open it up for questions from the audience. So feel free to ask at that point in time and hold your questions till we get to there. So, Joe, welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. So I just want to know, what do you do for fun with 5 kids?
Oh, golly. 4. It's 4.
4 kids, sorry.
You have me stumped there, man. Like 5.
5, you got 5.
Yeah, well, so they're a fun group. My oldest is 26, lives in Brooklyn and works in New York City. So that's great to go back and see her. It's a good excuse to go to New York City. Is the mic? Is that?
Yeah, it's totally
I'm just not talking into it. 18-year-old son, he plays basketball.
Awesome.
And his team just played in the state championship game a couple weeks ago. So that was fun.
How'd he do?
They lost by 2, which was tough, but they played a great game, and they were right there with 5 seconds to go, a chance to win.
That's all I can ask for.
So that's something. And they were playing Rainier Beach, purportedly nationally ranked team. So it was good. It was a good game. They had a chance. Then I've got 2 daughters, 14 and 9, and they're dancers, and it's fun to watch the 9-year-old's a tap dancer, and that's something.
Yeah.
Tap dancing is an impressive thing. So that's fun.
Yeah.
It makes it a lot of fun.
And what did you want to do when you were growing up?
Well, okay, so I wanted to be a writer, I think, is what I wanted to be. I aspired to be a writer.
And how long did that last?
It goes on. It continues.
It still continues.
Yeah.
That's hence the startup blog that you're famous for here in Seattle.
Yeah.
So when did you decide, you know what, I'm not going to be a writer, I'm going to be an attorney?
Yeah. So so when I was at the UW and sort of just taking classes of all different types and hanging out, I was trying to figure out, well, when I accumulated enough credits, sort of accidentally, to actually graduate, I was sort of thinking, well, maybe I should continue to go to school, and then I was thinking, well, what should I study? And I knew I liked writing, and I liked researching, and I liked arguing, and so I thought, well, I could get I thought about maybe pursuing a master's degree in economics, and then I thought about law school. Those are sort of the 2 things that sort of struck me as maybe potentially good ideas. And then I chose law school because I thought, well, maybe that's more practical than a master's degree in economics. I don't know. Yeah. It just was sort of luck or unluck. I don't know how you look at it. So
it's not like you were I've had guests up here that knew they wanted to be what they were at age 14.
No, not really.
Yeah, no.
Not really. No,
you figured out you were 21.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
No.
What did your parents do when you grew up?
Let me see. My mom was pretty much a stay-at-home mom, and my father was sort of jack of all trades. Fished halibut in the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. Yep. Built houses. Drove trucks. Sort of a guy who could do just about anything.
Yeah.
A handy guy, could figure things out. Fun guy.
Sure.
So yeah, just normal folks.
So here's a question I ask every guest.
All right.
What was the first time you earned $1 from someone other than a relative?
Okay, that's a good question. So I had a paper route.
That's funny. Where's Ron at? Is he?
And so
Yeah. We were just talking.
Yeah. So I had a paper route, and it was a good thing. It was a good thing.
So how old were you when you had your paper route?
I was probably 11, 12 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was good. I mean, I made quite a bit of money on that paper route. Yeah, so it was a good thing to do.
Why did you attend UW?
Well, let me see.
The only one that took you, or
yeah, right. No, it was local school. I thought at the time it was probably the best choice for me, and partial of the school because I grew up in this area, so
Sure.
I'm kind of a fan of the football team. So it sort of seemed like a natural choice.
sure. And why Seattle U to get your law degree?
Well, let me see. I got some financial inducements to attend.
That helps.
It was local. I thought about going to other places, but then sort of the advice I got was, well, if you want to work in this area, go to a local school. So that's basically the reasons. Yeah.
And then you went off to New York.
Yeah.
Tax degree.
Yeah. So during law school, I thought I wanted to be a tax lawyer, and so.
That doesn't sound exciting to me.
Yeah. No, actually, there's actually quite a bit of excitement in tax law. Yeah. Think about it.
I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that.
So, okay, there can be.
Yeah.
So anyway, I looked around at different sort of graduate tax degree programs thinking that would be a good thing to do. Immediately after law school, I worked for a judge for a year, a court of appeals judge here in the area. And my wife worked for a judge for a year for an area, and then we went back to NYU, and I took a master's degree in tax law. So it was, tax is exciting.
Okay.
We could blow everyone away right now talking about tax, but we don't want to.
We don't want to blow them away.
Yeah, no,
We don't want to do that.
Yeah, no.
I'm crazy here.
Yeah.
You do a ton of work with and for founders, startup founders in the city.
Yeah.
So first of all, just commend you for that. Keep it up. It's awesome.
Thanks. Yeah.
But why do you do it? What is it about founders? What is it about startups that really gets you? You've never had a startup.
Right. Yeah. Well, I like working with people who are building stuff. I mean, I think that's pretty fun. I get to vicariously participate in people who are building pretty exciting things.
Yeah.
So that's really fun.
So tell us a story about one of the more exciting ones you don't have to name names or anything, but like what's one of the more interesting ones you've worked with? It's like, I really enjoyed that for whatever reason. Like, so you don't have to tell us names or anything like that, but
Yeah. Well, I've worked with game companies. I've worked with enterprise software companies. I've worked with folks who are building online dating sites. And so I'm sort of agnostic when it comes to what sort of companies that are exciting to me. I think they're all pretty exciting.
But isn't there one or two or three that stick in your mind?
Sure. I mean, there was, I've worked with some gaming companies that were great.
Yeah. Or maybe they had a wacky founder. Maybe that was it.
Yeah. The people involved in startups tend to be high energy, dynamic people who are fun to be around. So it's and then the same can be said for the investors in these companies too, right?
Sure.
So there's a lot of folks who are investing in these companies that are great fun to be around.
So tell the audience, you've done a lot of financings over the years.
Sure.
Recently has offers and some other fairly big named ones. Explain to the audience what that's like, because I'm sure some people don't understand how that works from an attorney's standpoint. I mean, obviously, we understand it as startup founders. We go out and talk to people, and sooner or later, if we knock on enough doors, somebody gives us a check.
Right.
But from your standpoint, tell us kind of how that works, and if you can do that in a shorter version.
Sure. Yeah. So, what the lawyers are trying to do in all these deals is make sure that one, the parties are getting the business deal they expect and think they're getting, and there's nothing, in the deal that's not what they expect, or that's out of the ordinary, or that's going to sneak up on them later and surprise them and not be what they want.
Sure.
And also the lawyers want to make sure that all the details are handled correctly and nothing's sort of left hanging or untaken care of, so that the company could be hampered down the road trying to do some future transaction.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot of like just making sure things fit together in the correct way. Like you're putting a puzzle together and you don't want to put it together incorrectly, or you you're trying to build a machine that's going to run flawlessly from a legal perspective going forward. So it's interesting and fun. I think the the dynamics of negotiation a lot of times are really pretty fascinating. How do you negotiate a good deal? How do you negotiate?
Sure.
How do you say no? You're not going to do something, and frequently you can't necessarily get what you want until you're willing to say no.
Yeah.
We're not going to do it that way. Yeah. But how do you say that in a way that's accepted?
Yeah. And
it's not something that's, I don't think, widely taught in our society. And you see all sorts of different styles, and a lot of them, are not the product of a study. They're just sort of how people react when they're under stress or whatnot.
So tell us a story. We love stories. So tell us a story of a negotiation that went south.
That went south.
Yeah. Again, you don't have to use names, but tell us like a story where XYZ happened. He called her bad name and whatever.
Yeah. Gosh. There've been lots of transactions I've been a part of where people have sort of lost it, frankly, in all honesty, it takes a little while as a lawyer to sort of
lose it.
Well, no, actually, it doesn't. But I mean, I think it takes a little while of sort of seasoning before you sort of know sort of what's sort of just sort of the noises people make when they're unhappy or uncomfortable.
Sure.
And they're not necessarily a reflection of the person. I think a good story, it's not related to any deal I've done, but when Gary Kasparov used to play chess against other human beings, he would talk to himself, he would gesticulate, he would mumble, he would do all these things, and people thought he was just trying to intimidate the other player. And they thought he was, kind of a jerk maybe because he had this style of play that was, like this.
Sure.
But then when he sat in front of Big Blue, the computer, he did the same exact thing. And people thought, well, gee, that's just the way he is as a human. I mean, in order for him to function at that level of play, he had to do that. And I think a lot of times, people just react a certain way. It doesn't really have anything to do with who's on the opposite side of the table or necessarily anyone else, right? It's just them. It's just who they are. And
how they respond.
That's
how it happens. There's nothing wrong with that. Have you ever been close to working for a startup?
Oh, geez, I suppose so. Yeah. I mean, occasionally, every now and then, I'll get really excited about something he's working on. Something.
Has anyone walked up and said, "Joe, I want you to work with me"?
I've talked to people about that. I've been close a few times. Sure. Yeah. How could you not be?
And how'd the wife take that?
I'm still practicing law, so. Yeah.
So maybe that didn't go over so well.
Yeah. No. I mean, there's clearly a lot of folks who are building stuff that's going to be great. There's a lot of great companies being built right now.
Sure. Oh yeah.
And so.
Maybe someday.
Maybe. Yeah. Maybe.
You do a lot of blogging.
I do.
Which is awesome. How do you stay so consistent? Like, that's a lot of work, man.
Well, okay, so here's what I do, and this is crazy. This is a crazy writing methodology, but I'll share it with you, and you can all laugh and snicker and tell me I'm crazy. But here's what I do. So whenever I have an idea for a blog post, I write down the 2 or 3 words or maybe a sentence, and then I throw it in my outbox. Okay, and then I'm really spoiled, and I have a person who works for me who picks that thing up and types it, and then what I have is I have a bunch of these things. I have a bunch of these things going at any one time, and whenever I have a dead spot in the day, like 5 or 10 minutes, I don't have anything to do, I'm waiting for a phone call, or I just need to do something different for what I'm doing, I'll just sort of flip through this stack of things, and I'll find one and I'll write a few more words. Maybe I'll write another sentence. Maybe I'll add some punctuation or delete something. And I'll just kind of chip away at these things. I mean, sometimes these things sometimes they just take weeks and weeks and weeks before I even have one page written. But sometimes I'll pull something out of the stack and I'll think, gee, that's okay. That's okay.
Publish that one.
I'll hit the publish button on that one.
Yeah.
So it's wacky.
So you just keep chipping away at it, which is that's. Yeah. If you want literally great startup advice, you need to visit his blog. I mean,
Law blog.
startuplawblog.com. It really is great advice. I've read it many, many times. So who else in the blogosphere do you follow, or who else do you kind of...
Yeah, there are lots of great people out there writing stuff. I've been reading the new Ben Horowitz book.
Sure.
That's a great book if you haven't started that.
Yep.
Actually listening to it on Audible. So it's really well done. So I obviously read Fred Wilson.
Sure.
Like everyone else in the world.
Yeah.
I like Brad Feld. I like Bill Carlton at wax6.com. Local friend of mine. I poke around a lot and read from a lot of places.
Yeah. What books are on your Kindle or nightstand or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah.
What are you reading right now?
Well,
Outside of the Horizon or the Hortz book.
Yeah. So I read all the Game of Thrones books. I thought those were good. Let me see what else is on my Kindle. Lately I've been playing with Scribd. Scribd has a monthly subscription fee, and you can just look at anything that any book they have in Scribd. And so I've been reading just things I find in Scribd that are interesting. It's a bunch of random things.
They're short too, right?
Sometimes they're full-length books. They're present on Scribd. I like the Stephen Pressfield books. I don't know if you've read Stephen Pressfield. He wrote some great books on. He's written a lot of great books. He wrote a book called Gates of Fire about the Battle of Thermopylae. It was really, really great, well done book. I love that book, The Black Swan. I've read that a number of times. I think that's a book I keep going back to. It's a really, really well done book.
Yeah.
Those are the things that come to mind right now.
Okay, so we're going to jump into some law stuff.
All right.
In one of your blog posts, you talk about the difference between an LLC and a C Corp. Have you seen a trend in the last 5 years of more people creating LLC for a startup or less? Have you seen any trends in the LLC more or less in the last 3, 4, 5 years?
And what I do, the typical company I run into wants to raise money from angels or VCs, wants to do like a traditional stock option plan, and I encourage those folks to just do C corps.
Yeah.
Just because LLCs can get really complex really fast, and in my experience, founders, they want to try to keep the legal and accounting expenses to a reasonable number, and they just desire for things on that front to not be unnecessarily complex. So LLCs can be great if you've got the appetite to really do them correctly, but they're not easy to do correctly, and so just take a lot of time and effort.
Yeah, so C Corp is
I think C Corp is the way to go for the most part, yeah.
And can you tell us maybe 2 or 3 big mistakes that a lot of founders have made forming new corporations when they're forming their C Corp? Give us a couple big mistakes that.
Well, so one classic error is to not put in place some sort of founder vesting schedules, and so a founder owns stock outright, and then the founder ceases to contribute, and you're sort of stuck figuring out, well, how do I get those shares back? That's sort of a classic one. Another one is this stock options. You've got a company which is growing, making progress, hiring people, accumulating traction, and they're granting stock options over time, and then they fail to document board approval of the options, and then 18 or 24 months slips by, and then they find out that you can't sort of go back in time, and the value of the stock has gone up. That's sort of a nightmare to fix, and so that's sort of something you kind of always have to.
So what advice can you give to somebody that's starting a company to not let that bite you in the butt?
Yeah, well, so
what do you tell someone who's like,
if you're telling me it's like, Mike, this is what you need to do to avoid that to happen.
Yeah, so you gotta be willing to just spend a little time with the lawyers along the way, a little money along the way, just making sure things are in order and documented correctly. And I think most lawyers in town who work with startups try to do everything they can to make it as least painful and costly as possible to do it right. And so we have checklists and really good documents you can utilize to document all this stuff correctly and along the way, in web rooms where you can store the executed documents and get them all, get everything papered correctly. So it's that ounce of prevention versus so.
And tell us what's different about Davis Wright Tremaine, your law firm. You've been there 7 years?
Yeah.
Yep. Why why are you even there? And what's different about it?
Yeah. Well, I think we focus really hard on the customer service experience. So, when you go and you engage a professional, you want to have a really good experience. And what I always sort of search around for analogies. So what's the practice of law like? Well, it's sort of maybe it's like dining, right? You go into a restaurant and you want to be greeted by someone. You want to be seated promptly. You want to be attended to. You want to have your water glass filled and given a menu.
Yeah.
You want to be you want your food to be good when it arrives promptly. You want the bill to be reasonable. You want the whole experience to be like a really good experience. So maybe this isn't the best analogy, but it's similar, right? That's the kind of experience you want. You want to have a really good experience, and you want to say at the end of the experience, you want to say, "Wow, that was good. I'll go there. I'll eat there again. I'll tell my friends to eat there. That was really good."
Yeah,
that's what you want. So how do you do that? How do you do that on a law firm? That's the fun of it, right there.
Yeah, and you think you guys do a good job with it?
Yeah. And I think from start to finish, I think we make the experience a good one.
What do you think people overlook when talking about granting stock options or founder stock to others?
Well, most of the time, you should be utilizing, documents which are pretty standard form documents.
Yeah.
So they're going to have vesting schedules. They're going to have all the right bells and whistles in from a contractual point of view. And so the errors I see are the failure to document board approval of these things, fail to get the paperwork done timely. So you'll tell someone you're going to give them a stock option, you won't ever do it, or you won't do it, and then that person will ultimately cease working for the company,
Sure.
and then be wondering where they are and think they're getting something else, or not understand that stock options don't last forever, but the paperwork's still not delivered. You just got to get this stuff done.
Yeah, because if something would turn into an IPO and they think, maybe I should go back and sue that founder that didn't give me the stock.
Right.
Did you read that in Redfin about Redfin?
That's the thing.
Long time ago.
That sort of stuff happens all the time.
Yeah.
So.
And when you do go down that IPO, it seems to those kind of people start to.
Yeah. Whenever you're about to have great success, then sort of all that stuff sort of bubbles up.
Yeah. Do you have mentors? Do you have a mentor?
Mentor?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have mentors. Those are good, positive things to have. We encourage, when we have clients, we frequently advise them, form a board of advisors, right?
Sure. Oh yeah.
And so I do the same thing.
Yeah. And do you mentor anyone else? Are you a mentee?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
And which one do you enjoy more?
Which one do I enjoy more?
Which do you enjoy more? Being the mentor or being the mentee? I
think they're obviously totally different experiences, but I think both are pretty enjoyable. I guess actually receiving advice is actually it's funny. So if your business is giving advice, right? It's actually
which is most of your day.
Which is most of my day. It's actually a pretty good plan to go actually pay and receive advice, so you can see it from the other side.
Yeah.
So I guess if forced to choose right now, I'd say receiving advice from somebody is probably the thing I maybe enjoy more.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I had to choose.
What do you recommend to founders about recruiting high-profile board members? How do you go about that? Like, if there's a high-profile guy that you really want on your board, tell us how to what's your advice on how to do that?
Yeah, okay, that's a good question. Well, so there are some folks in town here who are really good at that, and there's some startup founders in town who've done a great job recruiting high-profile people. Yeah. And so if you haven't done it before, sure, ask your lawyer, like, hey, how would you suggest it? But you could also go seek out some of these people who I've seen done it, or maybe they've seen done it, and ask them how they did it. Fundamentally, though, you got to try to form a relationship with somebody, and you've got to ask them. You got to ask them for help. Hey, I'd like to talk to you about what I'm doing. Yeah. I'd like to get your feedback, and start with that, and see if you can engage somebody.
And
what you're doing.
In your experiences, have you found that that those people, those high-profile people, say yes more times than you think they're going to say yes?
Maybe. I mean, everyone's got constraints on their time. Like, that's one thing that's always hard, right? Everyone's got a lot of constraints on their time. But frequently, yeah. And if you've got something interesting that you're working on that coincides with something that they have an interest in, I think you've got a chance. Yeah. You've got a chance. And the worst thing that can happen is they could say no and you go on to somebody else. There's nothing wrong with you got to explore those connections, right?
Yeah. What part of your job do you hate the most?
Gosh, that's a good question. Yeah, I'm not sure if there is a part of the job I hate.
So what do you dislike the most?
I don't know. I mean, maybe not having enough time in the day sometimes to do everything you want to do. Maybe that's it.
There's not one thing in your day you don't like? Are you kidding me?
The difficulty of finding good food to eat, really good food to eat, maybe. I mean,
if that's the hardest thing you got.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's a pretty kind of absurd and unbelievable experience, really. Yeah. I mean, I get to sit in a really nice office and talk to people on the phone and send people emails and eat out every day.
Like, I mean, so romantic.
Well, I mean, let's think about it. I mean, compared to it's kind of ridiculous.
It's not like you're a roofer.
Well, I mean, there's probably lots of different things I could be doing that be maybe more interesting. Traveling around the world taking photographs or something. But I mean, it's all things considered, it's pretty nice. Yeah.
If you could only work with one business for 6 straight months, all day, every day, what business would it be?
Gosh, so you're asking me to pick one client to work with every day?
Maybe not. Maybe it's not a client. It doesn't say client. It just says
out of the sky. Just one business in the world.
If you could work for only one business
in the world
for 6 months, all day, every day, what business would it be?
Gosh. Well, okay. So I mean, that's kind of a fun question. Whoever dreamed up that was a good question. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe, they're in the news. Maybe Oculus Rift. I could sit around and wear the headphones. That'd be kind of fun.
There you go.
I'd like to try that out.
Yeah. Why not, right?
Sure.
Sounds like kind of living in a disjointed reality anyway. I mean,
that might be true.
That's great. What is the most challenging time period in your career?
Challenging time period?
Yeah, what part of your career has been the most challenging for you?
All right. Okay. So, I suppose getting started and kind of figuring out what I'd like to do. I mean, I think that's that was kind of hard for me. I mean, I thought I wanted to be a tax lawyer. Yeah. And I sort of did that for a little while, and then sort of figured out slowly that's not really what I wanted to do. And so I suppose it was a while back now, but I think there was like a fair amount of anxiety I had about trying to figure out what it was I wanted to do.
Yeah. Over the next 12 months, what industry do you think is going to be the most exciting? Looking ahead 12 months.
So my window forward is only 12 months.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I mean, getting back to Oculus Rift, I think virtual reality stuff is going to change the world. I think that is pretty interesting. I don't know if in the next 12 months that's going to be the most exciting place to be, but clearly over some longer time horizon, that's going to be pretty exciting.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you there. What has been your favorite company you worked for since you started in 1994? So you've been hacking away at it for 20 years.
Yeah.
What if you could pick one company like that was my favorite client?
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, I mean, I really like those guys, or the folks at PopCap Games. I thought they were great people. But I mean, I've worked with a lot of great companies, so it's kind of unfair to pick one.
But you already did.
All right, you got me. Yeah.
What company has overcome the biggest legal challenge?
Biggest legal challenge?
Yeah, and how did you help solve it?
Gosh.
What was just the big rat's nest that you?
Yeah. Well. Okay. So I mean, I've helped people get out of some sticky problems before. I'm not sure. I'm at liberty to disclose all of the details.
Sure.
But there've been projects where multiple different lawyers said, we're stuck. There's nothing we can do. And I said, well, wait, hold on. Let's let me take a look. I haven't looked at this. I'm not tainted with the knowledge you all have. Let's see if there's some fresh view of this. I've had successes like that. Where
what was the hairiest?
The hairiest? Well, I'm thinking back to a project I worked on where, we basically received permission to proceed with a transaction from a governmental agency where we didn't think we were going to get it, and it saved a lot of money in the process. On a sort of a novel theory that I dreamt up, and that was kind of fun.
Yeah,
it's kind of fun.
Did you compensate well for that?
No, it was just the ordinary,
Just kidding.
I mean, that's kind of the thing about the law, right?
I know
Sometimes
your business. It's not like you get a percentage of deals, right? You usually get paid an hourly rate, so sometimes you don't get paid at all.
That's true too.
Yeah. So I want to ask some questions about the new bill 2023.
Sure.
That is, and why don't you explain that in short form, just to the audience, because some people don't know this. I think it's a huge deal, but just give us a rundown on the bill.
Sure. Okay. So the bill is called House. It was House Bill 2023. It was sponsored by a local Seattle lawyer, Cyrus Habib, who actually turns out to be a startup lawyer at Perkins Coie. So. If you ever get the chance to meet Cyrus, he's a great guy. And the bill is going to allow equity crowdfunding here in Washington State. So if you're not familiar with the federal equity crowdfunding bill, which was in the Jobs Act, Title III, the federal Jobs Act sort of made the whole equity crowdfunding experience really, it's going to be really difficult and expensive to utilize those provisions. And so I was blogging about sort of how disappointing the federal bill was, and one day it came to me in one of these fits of craziness. Hey, why don't we do our own state bill? Why don't we do a state bill? Why don't we do one that would work, that people could actually use? Yeah. And so I actually wrote sort of just whole cloth out of my head in a proposed statute, posted it on my blog, and then got motivated and called John at GeekWire and said, hey, you want to run this thing? Yeah. On GeekWire, and he said sure. So he ran it, and then just coincidentally, sort of out of the blue, one day I was dining at Specialties, and I was just sort of eating by myself at like a late lunch at like 2:00, and Cyrus was talking to someone at a different table. I didn't know Cyrus, and we just happened to get up and sort of be leaving at the same time, and I'd heard Cyrus say something to this other person. And so I started to befriend Cyrus sort of just on the street out of the blue. And we talked for a little bit. And but in any event, a few weeks later, I think Cyrus is a state legislator from the east side, and he was looking for someone to come to Olympia to talk about how to make the Washington State business climate better. And he had assembled a group of people to come testify. And he asked me if I wanted to come down there and talk. So I went down there, and I brought the bill I wrote, and I was sort of the last person on the slate of people testifying. And when they got to me, there was like 3 minutes before the committee room had to be cleared out for somebody else. And so I spoke really quickly and said, hey, I wrote this bill. I think this would be great for Washington businesses. I'd love it if any or all of you would sponsor it. Thank you. And after that hearing, a few people came up, a few legislators came up to me and said they wanted to see what I'd written.
Yeah.
So I gave it to him, and Cyrus read it, and he liked it, and proposed it, sponsored it. And it turned out it was too late in the cycle in 2013, but Cyrus and his cohorts worked in the off season with the DFI to improve it. And then he was successful in getting a bipartisan effort this cycle in 2014 to get it through with the House and the Senate. So it's pretty exciting.
Yes, it's gone through the House, it's gone through the Senate,
Yeah.
and it's hopefully sitting on Governor Inslee's desk,
Yeah.
ready to be signed.
Yeah.
Knock wood.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's hope so. Yeah, that's right. And so I've been encouraging people to email the governor to encourage him to sign it.
Yeah, give us how does that help me as a startup founder?
Sure.
Like, I can raise $1 million. Give them a few details.
Yeah, so the bill will allow a business to raise up to $1 million during the course of a 12-month period from both accredited and non-accredited people. There are individual investor limitations that mirror the same limitations in the federal law. So if you have a less than $100,000 net worth or income, you can invest $2,000 or up to 5% of your net worth or income. So you're capped out on the low side. If you have more than $100,000 of income or net worth, you can go up to $100,000. The company will have to file paperwork with the DFI in order to do one of these offerings. Unlike the federal bill, there's no requirement to go through a portal. So the federal bill requires you to go through an intermediary. And the SEC estimates in its proposed rules that the intermediaries are going to charge like 8 to 10% of the offering proceeds. So that's a hefty kind of whack of your offering proceeds just get paid to an intermediary. Most founders of companies don't use intermediaries when they raise money. The founders just do it themselves, right? So under the Washington crowdfunding bill, you're not going to be forced to use an intermediary. You're not going to be forced to get audited financial statements. There will be a continuing disclosure obligation to investors.
That's fine.
And you will have to go through the DFI. So
the DFI is Department of Financial Institutions.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and there's I think there's good and ample investor protections in this bill. It's not going to be a zero cost offering.
Sure.
But I also don't think it's going to be one of the fundamental problems with raising money, if you're a small company, and what you've got is an idea and some code you've written, is you don't have $20,000 or $30,000 to pay to lawyers and accountants. Mm-hmm. So I think this bill will allow those types of companies, without incurring very much expense, to get out and to raise money. So
and does it allow them? Within that bill, could I post my product online?
Right. So one of the sort of secrets of the bill is that in order to avoid the federal law, which is not going to work, in order to avoid that, you've got to have what's a completely intrastate offering.
Sure.
So your business has to be incorporated here, has to be doing business here, and the investors have to be from here. And so if you do all those things, you can avoid the federal law, which is great. But that raises the question, like, well, can I post it on the internet where anyone in the world can see it?
Yeah.
And that's where the portal comes in. So there's going to be this thing called these things called portals, and they're going to have screens which don't allow you to get behind them until you can verify you're a Washington resident. But under this new bill, you won't have to use a portal. So if essentially it's going to allow you to do
But I would have to make those screens so I could verify that the person was in Washington.
If you wanted to post something on the internet.
That's what I'm saying.
But suppose you didn't want to post anything on the internet. So suppose you wanted to do like a friends and family offering.
Yeah.
This will really allow you to do a friends and family offering, in compliance with a securities law exemption that you can rely upon.
Yeah. And inexpensively.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I believe so. I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Compared to others.
Compared to others, yeah.
So, what do you think in the capital raising landscape will change based on this law?
Well, so hopefully we'll get businesses launched faster. And what I've seen is when founders go to raise money, they spend a lot of time trying to raise money.
Yeah.
And that just slows everything down, right? You got to take time away from building whatever it is you're building to try to go raise money. And it's for some folks, the fundraising process, does go, easy or relatively easy.
But
for some
most,
people, but for a lot, it takes months and months and months.
Yeah.
And so I think this will accelerate companies building what they're building, and that in turn, I think will excite funding sources upstream. So I think you'll get these small rounds through this state crowdfunding, and then when you've got traction, you'll be able to raise bigger angel rounds and/or venture rounds.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a great starting point for.
Yeah, I think so. I hope so.
Do you think the people that are writing the $2,000 to $10,000 checks will be hard to manage for a startup founder?
Well, some might be. I mean, this is going to raise the classic question of sort of hey, diligence goes both ways, right?
Yeah.
Because there is that, and it's not just the small people, the folks who write relatively small checks who can be problematic, as you know.
You can have people writing big checks.
Right, and so you really, I think anyone who's raising money needs to be careful, because once you take somebody's money, you're more than married to them, right? It's a relationship that's going to last a long time. So, yeah, I think it's gonna make the emphasis on diligencing both ways.
But in this new law, I don't have to know this person.
No, you don't. There's no requirement of a pre-existing relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. There is a nifty little paragraph I wrote which says something to the effect of, you've got to sign, if you're an investor, you've got to sign an acknowledgement that basically says, I realize I'm investing in something that's very risky.
Yeah.
And I know I'm potentially
going to
lose all my money, right?
Yeah. Yeah, which everyone signs that. Right.
Right. So it's going to be a short little thing people have to sign.
Yeah. Do you think fraud will be an issue?
Well, I hope not. And I think the fact that people have to go through the Department of Financial Institutions will prevent a lot of that. I think crowdfunding advocates, first of all, they're an awesome and enthusiastic group of people. But I think I'd be surprised to find any who don't want to be careful, right? Because if we have this great moment to experiment, we don't want to have the experiment ruined by fraud. So under this state bill, I think, because you've got to go through the DFI, I think, people who are prone to commit frauds, I think are going to not do it at all.
Yeah. And will it do you think it's going to create this kind of niche industry for maybe consultants to help people through this process? Or is it just not going to affect, is that not going to be created and it's just going to kind of flow into what we already have today? Do you think you're going to, is DWT going to have a practice for Bill 2023? Are they going to have a little niche practice that Joe's going to help?
Folks will need help, right, navigating this. I think people who do hire lawyers, it's a good idea to hire a lawyer when you're doing a securities offering. But what I hope will happen is that the process to do one of these offerings is one that doesn't require a lot of heavy lawyering, so that it can be inexpensive, and people can hopefully maybe even substantially do this themselves.
Yeah, and understand it as well, which is the key, right? They can at least start to understand how it works. Yeah.
No, I hope so. I think if you're doing a small fundraise, you can't spend a lot of money on lawyer and accounting fees, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's been an evolution. As you've seen rounds get smaller, the stack of legal documents that goes along with them has gotten thinner, and so I think that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
You got to calibrate those.
Save trees.
What's that?
Save a tree.
Save trees. Yeah.
Got to save trees. We're going to jump to something. What is one of your favorite stories about your first meeting of a founder?
First time I met a founder.
First time you met a founder, he's becoming a client, or maybe he's not a client yet. Give me a story like, wow, and would have never imagined that.
Oh, golly. Well, that's funny. Yeah. I've met a lot of interesting people along the way.
You don't have to mention his name.
Yeah. Shoot.
Did he show up on a llama or something like?
Yeah. I'm not sure I can recollect a specific story right now that's worthy of sharing, but
you can not answer it. Do you think you've become a good evaluator for business models?
That's just so hard. I mean, I think it's so hard to predict what's going to be a success. It's easy to I think it's easy for people to conclude things aren't going to be a success. And I've seen lots of people, say, things about companies, that weren't positive, and then I've seen those companies turn out to be, great success stories.
Yeah.
So it's really easy to make a negative judgment about companies. It's really hard. It's really hard, in my experience, to ascertain which one's really going to take off. And frankly, I think been surprised a lot. You can't predict.
What's been your biggest surprise?
I guess here's a story. So early in my career, I had a client that had a concept. It was a concept stage company. It was a good idea, but it was brand new, and who knew, right? Who knew if it was going to be a success or not? And I was working with this founder, and he was raising angel money. He had success. He raised several $1 million in angel money. And I was sort of, not certain about the business's future prospects. It was a small team, primarily driven by the one founder, and I just had no idea what was going to happen with this company. And he raised a lot of money, and so I was, as a lawyer, I was sort of concerned, right? And I was looking around at some of the other deals my teammates were working on, and there was one company that I had some colleagues working on at the time that was sort of widely perceived to be the next great thing. Sure. It had raised an extraordinary amount of money, and everyone believed it was like the next great company in Seattle. And I have this distinct memory of thinking to myself, "Gosh, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know what's going to happen between these two companies." And the one that everyone thought was going to be a winner, and it had raised literally tens of millions of dollars of venture capital money, that one went to zero. And the guy who I had uncertainty about, he ended up selling his company to a public company, and it was a nice win. Yeah. And you just don't know. You just literally don't know what's going to happen. Yeah. It's really hard to predict. Yeah. And it's easy in hindsight to say, "Oh yeah, of course." It's really easy in hindsight, right? Really easy.
You would have written a check for Twitter, right?
But at the time, a lot of people will pass on deals, right? And then they'll look back and they go, "Wow, how could I? What was I thinking?" Yeah. It's just really hard. So,
give us some things you always look for before you think about investing. Not that you're, necessarily an investor, but what things do you look for? Does Joe look for in a team and/or a concept?
Sure. So I like folks who are willing to experiment, who acknowledge that they don't know, that like to build and iterate, that aren't afraid to fail, aren't afraid to completely change paths and try something else, that want to listen to other people. life's unpredictable, and frequently what people say is a lot different what people are going to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so and that's true when they come to using products.
Yeah.
I mean, people will you can go and talk to a lot of people and try to figure out what people want, and people can be completely honest and tell you what it is they want, and then you can build something for them, and then they'll actually use it in a way that doesn't necessarily coincide with what they said.
Yeah.
And so you really need to experiment and see what happens.
Yeah.
And you just got to go out there and build it, push it hard, and then try something else if you have to.
Yeah.
Right?
So, anyone who wants to ask a question, feel free, raise your hand. If you have some questions in there, go ahead, John.
So I have a lot of House Bill 2023 questions. For example, in the process of raising this non-accredited money, there's a whole collection of associated processes and activities you have to do that are going to increase the costs of managing a business. So what kind of corners am I going to get stuck with, or what kind of costs I'm going to have to do to raise that? And so I get 1,000 people that give me $1 million. Is that going to cost me $200,000 to administer?
Right. I don't think it'll cost you $200,000 to administer, but I also think that you probably won't take money from 1,000 people. I mean, I think this bill is designed to. One, you can raise up to 100,000 from high wealth people. Two, I think you're going to want to, exercise caution when you're raising funds, and be cognizant of the fact that when you bring people on and put them on your cap table, there's a cost, there's sort of a carrying cost of sort of having a large cap table. I mean, there's just a carrying cost associated with that. People are going to call. People are going to want reports. You're going to have to manage communications with a lot of people. So I think as a practical matter, what people are going to do is they're going to raise relatively small amounts of money, or if they raise up to $1 million, they're going to raise it in such a way that they still don't end up with 1,000 people on their cap table. So that's at least what I would encourage people to do. And then I think the other thing you might see happen is, rather than issuing stock, you might see people issue loans which pay back multiple of the amount of the loan, and then once it's paid back, those folks aren't on the cap table because their debt holders will be paid back, and that could be a nice mechanism to raise some money, but also enable a future investor to come in and pay off that debt, fund the company to a greater amount.
So in your portals, you say that a portal can be managed by an economic development entity, and you're very narrow in that definition. Why did you define it that way? Well,
there is a definition that relates to the local economic development agencies, but portals also will include other types of entities as defined by the DFI. And the DFI is going to issue a notice of proposed rulemaking, and people are going to be able to give comment on how the DFI should define that term. And so there'll be an opportunity for people to give the DFI suggestions. And so it won't just be that narrow group of economic development organizations. Yeah.
So in terms of how many rounds you can raise, can you raise multiple rounds of $1 million? Is there any limits? What would prevent a company from saying raising 12 rounds in a year for $1 million?
Mm-hmm. Right. So it's $1 million cap during any one 12-month period. Right. So, but you could raise, in the subsequent 12-month period another $1 million.
There's no cap on the number of people in that round, right?
The outside cap would be the number which would make you a SEC reporting company,
which is
under 12G, either 2,000 or 2,500. I can't remember off the top of my head.
That's a lot. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Nick.
What are your thoughts on AngelList and how it will change the funding experience as a founder, like in the next 2 to 5 years? Sure.
Well, I think AngelList has already changed everything. I think it's a great thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I can't say enough about it. I think it's a great development.
Yeah, I think it's great for every. I mean, one, it helps the documentation, which I think is so important.
Right.
It helps with that process, so you can actually see templates and documents that you could use with a little bit of tweaking.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great thing, AngelList.
So the direction they're going though is essentially the financing they're building out a product that it'll all go through that
Right.
platform,
Right.
portal. It's like we were talking about before. Do you think that is a good thing compared to maybe what was, pretty much the norm over the last 20, 30 years?
I guess I'd say, one, I think that sounds like a good development, a good positive development. I suppose just like every other, thing in the world, it's not like they're going to capture 100% of the market on that. But I think AngelList is a great tool, and to the extent they can make things easier and better for founders, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
One of the characteristics of a regular crowdfunding site is that you set a minimum goal and then you can exceed it.
Right.
So in this case, obviously, you couldn't do that because it would dilute the stock further, and people that bought it in the first place would be screwed. Do you imagine that there's going to be like an opportunity for multiple rounds of funding within one project?
Well, I guess first off, I mean, you're gonna under the 2023 bill, you're gonna have to specify a minimum.
Absolutely. But on Kickstarter, for example, you specify a minimum, and after that tipping point, it's funded automatically, but there's no ceiling.
Right.
So if you were to set your valuation and your stock price according to your goal, and then you exceeded it in the fundraising, it would devalue the stock.
Well, let's just take an example. Sure. Let's just. I mean, typically a company that is going to specify.
Can you I can. Let me.
So the question is, what happens if you exceed your fundraising goal? How does that affect the dilution of the other stockholders?
Because there's in this law, there's a minimum. You have to set a minimum threshold that you're going to raise before they'll actually release funds. So.
Yeah, so I think what companies will do is they'll specify the minimum, and they'll also specify a desired total fundraise, and so they'll have an expectation about the dilution that everyone will experience if they max out their round. So I mean, companies can control. There's no sort of companies are gonna be able to specify how much they want to max out at, and they're going to be able to just stop the round whenever they desire to stop the round, right? So.
Right here.
I have to say I enjoy your blog a lot.
Thank you.
You forgot to plug your upcoming talk about crowdfunding.
I'm sorry, what?
You're up funding next 2 weeks. Your event we're doing about your.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Maybe you're saving that for last. So kind of related to the gentleman that talked about AngelList. Traditionally they relied on things like no action letters from the SEC, check boxes for people saying I'm accredited with this. Or do you see the state level portals or systems kind of changing that on a nationwide basis? Do you think AngelList might morph into something that's maybe a little more localized or higher cap levels? Or how do you see the landscape changing?
Well, okay, that's a good question. So I think depending on what this state's securities division does and how they define portals, it might be that some of the portals already operating, like AngelList or some of the others, will create Washington State specific portals for this type of fundraising, and I think that completely possible and doable.
Sure, that you still see an ongoing necessity or usefulness for federal level non-action letters, that sort of, where the SEC is saying, well, we're going to turn the other cheek, or not necessarily doing what we do.
Well, okay, so I guess maybe a broader answer to that is that, I think you're going to hopefully continue to see developments at the federal level to facilitate this sort of activity. I mean, I don't think the story's finished yet, and so, and frankly, maybe Congress will, revisit the Jobs Act and make amendments to it that make it more usable. In fact, I think there's a good chance of that, especially if we continue to talk to our elected officials and tell them what we want.
Right here.
Deal terms you see recently, and how does it compare to say maybe years ago?
Oh, let me see. So the question was, are deal terms getting better or worse? How do they compare to a couple of years ago? Well, I think, the economic, things are better now than I'd say 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And for the, for the right teams,
Terms are better, though.
terms are better. I think, so for the companies that have it going on, that have great teams and have got traction, all that stuff, they're getting great terms. And then, for companies that aren't perceived to be in that box, I think they're still sort of laboring under the difficulty of raising funds at all. So
Yeah, and do you think the difference between Silicon Valley and Seattle is distinct in terms? Maybe. That's a poor answer.
Yeah, I think that's the old saying, right? Oh, you get
exactly.
better terms in Silicon Valley. Yeah, and okay, maybe you do. Sure.
Yeah.
I think it depends. I've seen really favorable terms up here in Seattle on deals.
Yeah.
I've seen deals up here from local, money that were really favorable, term deals that probably wouldn't have gotten this favorable deal terms as in the valley. So, but that's the thing about these transactions. Like there's, a lot of variation in what happens. So,
Yeah.
Share some numbers.
Like about what? Like. Oh, that's tough. So he's saying, can we share some numbers about Series A valuations? I don't know how you would do that. It's just so all over the board.
Yeah, I'd refer you to that. I'd just refer you to there's a bunch of deal stays coming out on the internet on a regular basis, and I can help you tomorrow if you email me. Locate some of them. I don't have the ability right now to withdraw from my memory bank any kind of data like that.
Halo report's coming out this week.
Yeah, that's right. So that's a good resource.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rob?
Given the less than lightning speed with which the SEC moved to sort of enact the Jobs Act,
Right.
pull out your crystal ball and give us an idea of when the first fundraising can happen.
Right.
So the question is, when do you think the Jobs Act, which is the federal side, right, Rob, you're talking about the federal or you're talking about state?
I'm talking about state.
Oh, okay.
The SEC has been, moving at the slug's pace to get that done. So now we're at the state level.
Right.
Are we going to be here talking about this 5 years down the road?
Yeah, so when can we actually raise money with the state law? Let's assume that it gets signed just on a whim on Friday.
Okay.
Okay, how long before we can actually use it?
Okay, that's a good question. So I think it's possible that the state bill could be, active and in use in Q1 of next year.
So if the governor signs it this week, we're looking at 6 to 9 months before all the ducks are in a row to actually go do it.
Yeah, the statute itself specifies when the Department of Financial Institutions is supposed to have finalized the rules. But yeah, I think on the front side of next year.
That's great. Right back there, yes.
So during the past 20 years, you have advised, hundreds and thousands of founders. You have seen lots of success stories and I'm sure lots of failures as well. So my question is more general. What would be your top 2 legal advice to startups? Sort of looking for what to do and what not to do.
So what are the top 2 things for a startup to do or not to do that gets them in a whole lot of hot water or keeps them out of hot water?
Sure. Okay. Well, okay. So one, make sure all your founder stock issuances are documented, with vesting conditions, and then 2, don't make promises for equity that are not documented. I guess that'd be 2.
So don't do it with a beer in your hand. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. People do this all the time, and then it just haunts them.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Hey, just kind of along those same lines, you know, let's say I'm an aspiring entrepreneur in the Seattle community and I have an idea for something that I want to manufacture and I'm trying to start a business around it. Who in Seattle do I need to go see for legal advice? And you know, where do I need to start? What questions do I need to start with?
So he's saying he's starting a company, and what do I do? Where do I go to start this company? Who do I talk to?
Sure. Well, okay. So there's sure.
Yeah, on legal side. Sorry.
Yeah, there's a lot. Well, first of all, there's lots of great startup lawyers in town.
Sure.
And so, I mean, ask people around you. Hey, you know, I want to start this company. I need to form a business entity. Who do you recommend? Who's a good lawyer in town? Be reasonable and prompt and provide me good service when I walk in the door. And you'll get some names and go meet with them. See who you sync with and who you like.
Yeah, one thing you don't have to do is it's just like interviewing anything else. When you walk in the door, you don't have to choose them. Just if there's some reason that you don't get along, maybe there's a personality conflict or whatever, or you just don't like the guy or girl, you don't have to work with them. So interview them just like they're interviewing you. That's really important. I mean, and if you need an IP attorney, I know a great one. Seed IP. So.
Right. Yeah, there's lots of great people in town. I'm happy to share a bunch of names with you.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah.
What was that?
The bar.
Oh, the bar. Oh, okay. Yeah. And there's what is Avo? AVVO?
Yeah, Avo would be another place to look. But honestly, if I would just ask people around you.
Yeah.
People you know.
Yeah. That's how you do it. You just ask a question, you get an answer. How great is that? Any other questions, guys? Rob?
So, sort of related to the do's and don'ts. So, if I'm getting ready to, or I would like to issue some options or restricted grants to non-U.S. citizens. Possible, not impossible.
He wants to issue stock options or restricted grants to a non-U.S. resident. Yeah, he wants to take Russian money. Yeah.
Workers, yeah, it's possible. Yeah, I mean, your lawyer ought to be able to, promptly tell you how to do that when you ask him or her.
It's not unusual.
No.
Both.
Right. It's a good question about HB 2023. So it has to be a Washington organized company doing business here. So you raise a good question, which I'm not sure the law answers, which is, well, what if it's, Washington Corporation doing business here, but I happen to be, tapping away in my garage in Palo Alto? Can I do it? And I'd like to say the answer is yes. And I think the statute could be read that way. But that might not be the answer. We're going to find out. But it's the statute says Washington Corporation or LLC
It doesn't say
doing
where
business here.
The CEO doesn't have to live here or.
So what does it mean to do business here? I mean, I guess that's the question. What does it mean to do business here? Yeah, and I think probably the answer is going to be you've got to be doing business here, which means you've got to have something going on here.
Other questions? John?
So I still have this, I'm going to raise $1 million from 1,000 people stuck in my head.
Right.
And I want to avoid this cap table noise.
Right.
Can I form an LLC and put it on an LLC and hide it? That's what we do at the Angel Conference, so why can't I do it?
Yeah, it's not going to work. So the investors have to be individuals resident in the state of Washington. So.
Can't be a corporation or an LLC.
But I'm sure there are some great companies out there who do cap table management for a reasonable fee.
Any more questions, guys? Go ahead, Vlad.
So, are
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like a regular corp. No more questions. I'm not going to count you in, John. Seton, you have a question back there?
What do you see as the future for economy here in Seattle regarding startups and drawing from the international community, especially with the visa issues?
Do you want to repeat the question?
Yeah, so Seton wants to know what Joe thinks of the future of the Seattle startup community as it pertains to H-1B visas, bringing international people over. Seton, is that correct?
Basically, the international influence and how Seattle's going to stack up, especially in light of the H-1B.
Yeah.
Right. Well, so I guess you know, I think Seattle's positioned to do great. I think we have a lot of things going in our favor, and hopefully, I think we're going to have a great next 20 years here in this area. And I hope the Congress can figure out the immigration problems. Of course, the immigration problems affect all states. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a reasonable chance that we'll get some sort of reasonable immigration reform. I think that there's a good chance of that happening. But anyway, I think this area is going to do great, and I think we have we're so fortunate to have Amazon and Microsoft and
Boeing, and
we've got great companies up here. And by the way, those companies are bringing in great talent from all over the world. How lucky can we be?
Yeah,
it's a great thing.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Can you tell what problems do the H-1B holders who want to form a company they face from the legal perspective, which the regulars don't face? Like extra problems that H-1B people faces because of forming a company here on H-1B visa.
So we're talking about H-1B visa problems and founders. Yeah, I'm not going to be the best person to answer that question for you. I can give you some commentary, and I think one of the things founders who are here on H-1B run into is the immigration authorities are sensitive to the risk of just paper companies being created to help people get immigration status, and so they view startups with suspicion because a lot of times startups don't have office space, don't have a lot of money in the bank, a lot of employees, and so they're at a natural disadvantage. They might very well be real companies, right? But they might look like these things that have been used to sort of not in the spirit of the immigration law. So that's one thing that startups sort of battle in that arena. Yeah. But I'm not probably your best source for the complete gloss on that.
Last question.
Is there any indication in the legislation that the portals might be limited to Washington state companies?
I haven't seen anything like that in the legislation. I don't think that's in the legislation, so that would have to bubble up out of the regulatory process. So, I think the legislation's got a lot in it, though. Focus on, hey, we got to have Washington investors, we got Washington companies doing business here. I'm not sure why it would matter, to fulfill the purposes of the statute if the portal happened to be a Delaware company or a company in some other jurisdiction.
Yeah, and they just got to check the checkbox that says I'm Washington, et cetera.
Right.
Well, thank you very much, Joe. I really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you all for being here.